Hello and welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus. Might be a little bit frazzled in this video because I just finished this entire video up to the 29-minute mark. When I was done, my computer crashed. I lost my entire video. So I'm going to have to redo the entire video again. So here we go. We're talking about the nature of evil entities in higher dimensional planes of existence. And so once again, I'm going to reference the law of one material. Law of one material, it's not something I hold up as like some kind of Bible. It's still channeled material, unlike, for example, silver birch material. Maurice Barbanel, who was a verifiable evidential medium, and we knew that he was getting information from that side. I don't know what protocols were in place with Law of One. I just think that the information is really good, especially for refuting a lot of these bubblegum or pop spirituality ideas that you cross over and there's no such thing as negative entities. Or, it's been very, very well documented, the existence of negative entities. And there's also the philosophical question where we may all be love and light, but what about these narcissists and sociopaths? Where do they come from? Because a narcissist or a sociopath still has the ability to have what seems like a level of spiritual development. Like my father was the biggest narcissist of all time, and he had like a level of psychic power, and it's like he was a higher dimensional sort of negative entity trapped inside of a human body. And everybody around him knew that. The way he could influence people's thoughts and ideas, and do a lot of stuff which sometimes was very harmful and destructive. Sometimes it was strangely benevolent. You can never quite figure out what page my father was on, but he was basically like a Sith Lord. I don't know if that makes me into Luke Skywalker, although I know people tell me I look a little bit like Mark Hamill. I don't know. But anyway, so the Law of One material explains that in this article, which is called the mentality and mechanism behind fourth and fifth density negative entities. And the material, again, although I don't hold it up to a high standard, I'm not that impressed by the fact that the entity who calls itself Ra seems to have 0% sense of humor. It's all written in a way that can be very dry, and that's not something I'm a big fan of either. But basically, one of the reasons I think the information is important is because, unlike very new agey areas, I said we have to completely eliminate the quote ego and transcend like 100% into being the most exalted, perfect being possible. Then you get these gurus and people claiming they've done that. They turn out to be huge jerks. That they're who are just hiding behind a facade. The Law of One points out that to achieve a level of true enlightenment, consciousness development, it requires being just 51% more service to other, more altruistic than selfish. And that we might think that's easy, but it's actually not. Most people can't get to that level. Most of us are like 40-60, 45-55. We're not at that level. To be even, 51% not selfish means that we gain access to higher dimensional realms of existence. So this is what we literally mean when we talk about ascending to a higher vibrational level. Being able to go from, let's say, the astral plane into the upper astral plane, the greater astral plane. And in Law of One terms, the normal kind of astral plane is fourth density. And then the higher level above that is fifth density. So part of that involves being of, a level that they would call you're harvestable, which I'll get into more about that in a second. So anyway, before we jump more into this material, again, you're watching Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. Best thing you can do is hit that subscribe button, like the video, share the video. If you think this work is important, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Afterlife Topics if you want to see this work continue. And a special thanks to all the patrons out there who have supported this work. You guys know who you are. Thank you for allowing this to keep going as it has. And also, if you are subscribed, double check, because YouTube has been deleting subscriptions very frequently. So a quick preamble so we know what they're talking about in this article. They talk about concepts like being harvestable. So this goes into the kind of the cosmological angle, which I don't know how I feel about it precisely, but basically, if you can be harvested means that higher source consciousness sees that a civilization is at a point where it can naturally rise to a higher level without everybody having to die. So you're still in this world, in this body, but then suddenly you can behave like you're on the astral side, teleport, use telepathy, all of this type of thing. Well, to be able to ascend those planes, you have to be 51% service to other people. And to be 51% service to other people takes a lot of work, a lot of self-development, and a lot of growing your empathy, learning to to love others and people around you, and how that creates this ripple effect or a boomerang, like that positive energy, that love for others comes back into your heart, and then you become a nicer, better person, and everything just gets better and better. And this is actually raising your vibration, and you'll reach a point where you can, in certain cosmological conditions, ascend into that fourth density level without having to die to be able to get there. But this happens based upon like cosmological energy shifts. And so this is when all the New Agers talk about ascension, and this is what they're talking about. But in Law of One, it's not just New Agey ascension sitting on your ass and waiting to get, just shoot through the roof like a rapture prophecy. You actually have to put in a lot of work to be able to get there. And if you don't put in that self-development work, the so-called ascension energy comes, and then I guess you'll be the biblically left behind with all the jerks. But before we don't want to dig too deep into that rabbit hole, or that I don't even know if I really believe much of that, but it's worth reporting. It's what this information is all about. It's what they talk about a lot. So I want to just reference that before we go deeper. So let's begin this article. So the questioner asks, it states that if an entity goes over 51% service to other people and is less than 50% service to self, then that entity is harvestable. Is that correct? And then Ra responds, this is correct if the harvesting is to be of the positive fourth dimensional, which he means astral level. So the questioner asks, what is to be the entity's percentage if he is to be harvested for the negative? So this is when we get into the really, really kind of crazy, weird angle of all of this. It's the idea that there is this source consciousness, and what all of us are basically doing, whether we know it or not, is that we are trying to rejoin, as we always talk about merging with source, but it's not this instant thing like they talk about in books, where you just die and you become all-knowing and all-powerful. Instead, it seems to be this perpetual, if not eternal, process of fractured elements of source re-merging with the infinite awareness that is everything, which we could say is the highest state of love, I suppose. But there's entities, and so this is the spiritual origin, I guess, of the narcissist, of the sociopath. You can actually join that path where instead of loving other people and learning to love people around you and being compassionate, being empathic, and being a caring person, if all of that is directed inward to the love of self, because you are a fraction, a fragment of one infinite creator, so you can technically rejoin by just going inward enough and only loving yourself. But the negative path is going inward, loving yourself, while not caring anything about anything else around you. So becoming more of a narcissist, more of a sociopath, until you reach like a apex of this dark path, which actually raises your vibrational level. So as a result, a very, very evil entity could ascend into higher dimensional levels of existence. And so this makes me think of like Lord of the Rings, or Sauron, for example, a higher dimensional entity that has all the higher dimensional abilities and comes from the world of the angelic realm. If you read the Tolkien mythos, came from it was one of the Maiar, I think is what they called it. Same as Gandalf and those guys. So he came from this realm of this angelic realm, and has all those powers and more so, but it's aligned to a self-serving path, which like all tyrants, could actually create a harmonious society, but it's being built upon kind of the backs of a path of service to self. So it's achieving spiritual harmony through behavior that has no concern for others. And certainly, I mean, we will probably see that in tyrants from this existence. Which, again, in a weird way, I mean, you could maybe have an entity like that controlling a planet, for example, and everything has to serve its wishes because all it cares about is just serving itself. But maybe in doing so, you could have a society that's peaceful and harmonious and then allows other people to, ascend the way that they wanted to. But it's being delivered through this corrupted route, which is, basically the path of evil. So that's what Ra talks about. So let's keep going. Questioner, what is to be the entity's percentage if they be harvested for the negative? So what level of this before they can ascend to a higher dimension? Ra says, the entity who wishes to pursue the path of service to self, path of the Sith, path of the dark side, must attain a grade of 5. That is 5% service to others, 95% service to self. So you must be like a narcissist sociopath on this extreme level with no concern about anybody else around you, hardly at all, almost no empathic ability, and then you can like do a dark transcendence, a dark dimensional shift, and begin scaling upward into some kind of dark higher dimensional plane of existence. And you might be thinking that this is ridiculous, Cyrus. We know that things couldn't exist on that level. But what Ra is saying is that they can exist on perhaps the 4th density, the astral level, or even the upper greater astral level, the 5th density, because they have such an all-powerful love of themselves. It's that love allows them, because it's still love, even though it's it's a cancer, it's affecting and corrupting everything around it. That love of itself allows it to propel forward. But this is not common. So those of you who are listening and freaking out about this, according to Law of One, it's not something that's common. It's like a small percentage of souls are on this dark path, and this is how you can have like a higher dimensional being who is still negative. So we'll get to that in a moment. They ask, basically if the negative path is more difficult to attain than the positive path, and Ra says, to kind of paraphrase, that getting 51% service to others is more difficult than to get 95% service to self. So it's actually, this would be like one of the temptations. It's more tempting, a little bit more easy to gain basically power, to gain dimensional power, to ascend, move up this way on the path of the narcissist than it is to actually put in the work and to learn to love and be kind to everybody around you. It's a little bit easier to do it the dark path. And again, this is one of the temptations present about those like civilizations that want to ascend, gain dimensional power, control. They can walk this dark path and maybe do it a little bit more quickly, a little bit more easily, while condemning everybody around them. Now you might be wondering, well, what about like negative karma, dark astral conditions? It's important to point out when we talk about densities, we're not talking about how happy, fun, or nice those densities are. We're not talking about how, the 5th density, the upper astral plane, means that you have like frickin' Sauron in a wondrous world of flowers and meadows and rainbows and unicorns. The density term is neutral in terms of positive or negative. So we're talking about negative astral realms and negative upper astral realms, that an entity can still ascend into what we could almost think of as like a hellish condition. So they are operating as a higher dimensional being in a higher dimensional negative realm of existence. It's a separate thing when we talk about, for example, if there's a realm of service to others, that's going to be the happy, wonderful, heavenly environment because everyone loves each other and it's wonderful. If there's a realm of service to self entities, then it's going to be dismal and terrifying because everything only cares about themselves. So it's the propagation of selfishness, but they still exist on a spectrum of certain levels of the power of consciousness. So a fifth density negative spectrum would be a higher astral plane that's evil and corrupt. And that is a terrifying thought, because we can explore the concepts of lower astral planes. The Anthony Borgia work goes into that a lot, and a lot of it's realms of the mind. But what hasn't maybe been fully explored as well is that when, the idea that there's negative planes, that instead of just being full of, evil, rather just like chaos and self-loathing and things like this, but more like calculating evil, calculating sociopathy, calculating narcissism. And these types of realms would be, I don't know, just use your imagination. Questioner asks about how many levels of densities exist, and Ross says there's infinite. So there's infinite gradients of the astral plane. There's not just like we go from here to here to here. There's the infinite, all depending upon the individual understandings and personalities and levels that people are on. And so we've talked about that. This is also something that's kind of known. And there's infinite levels of this density of the Earth plane we're on. So it's a never-ending, it is infinite spectrum of places that you can go to when you travel between densities, dimensions. Okay, so now they start going into talking a little bit about the Orion group. So again, it's the cosmology of this work. Take from it what you will, but it's basically they claim that these negative entities on this plane of existence are like the reptilian aliens, and that they belong to a empire that they call the Orion group. And a long time ago, there was a war in the galaxy against this Orion group, and Ra describes them as fifth density. So they are fifth density entities that can come down and inhabit third density vessels to attack and wage war on people. And the questioner, the person asking the questions, basically asks about what would they look like. So they ask, when an Orion entity who awaits us seeking the opportunity to attack is here with us, can you describe the method of coming here, what they look like, what the signs of their presence are? Ra responds that Ra actually says that in general, fifth density entities are very light and beautiful looking beings. So a fifth density, service to other being is extremely angelic. This is also in the Ra teachings. Jürgen describes similar things. That a resident of the greater astral plane, when you look upon them, let's say it's a female, and this will be the most beautiful woman you've ever seen, is ethereal, heavenly looking, like we'd think of as an angel. They wouldn't be connecting to the ground, they'd be floating, they'd be shimmering, prismatic, maybe shape-shifting. So this is what a fifth density entity is like. Ra curiously seems to say here that in response to the negative fifth density entities, that fifth density entities are very light beings, so they do not have the type of physical vehicle that we'd understand, but they're very fair to look upon in our standards of beauty. So this would mean that, again, it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, because Sauron, despite being an evil entity, was when he took human shape in the Tolkien mythos, was like described as very fair to look upon, very beautiful looking, before he became made of like charred metal and all of this. So as a higher dimensional or angelic being, he still had those attributes of being able to physically look very beautiful, but was coming from this deep, service to self negative path. Okay, so let's keep going. So Ra talks a little bit about when there is a negative entity in our midst, that there's a drop in temperature, because it's a sign or presence of a negative or non-positive entity draining the energy around it and sucking it up. So that's another interesting point to think about. So let's get into a little bit about the temptations. So Ross says that nearly all positive channels and groups may be lessened in their positivity or rendered quite useless by what we may call the temptations offered by the fourth density negative thought forms. And this was basically in response to asking, like, why would these fifth density reptilian aliens attack when they could just send fourth density like minions to do the work for them? And basically what Ra is saying is that this is the ongoing issue, is that a fourth density entity that is on the negative spectrum has the ability to shape us, manipulate us, send people to the dark side, influence them toward that, and this weakens and can destroy civilizations. So they are operating behind the scenes to tempt and manipulate and in my opinion, offer promises of power, things like that, as a way of bringing people into that path of service to self, thus kind of joining their cause. So Ra says nearly all positive channels and groups may be lessened in their positivity or rendered useless by what we may call the temptations offered by negative thought forms. So again, even on the astral conditions, even on the fifth density upper astral conditions, beautiful luminous worlds that we hear stories about, even those civilizations, it's an ongoing battle between good and evil. It's an ongoing battle where even the enlightened, high-level angelic beings, according to Law of One, are still dealing with high-level angelic negative entities that are trying to pull people toward the path of service to self as the spiritual path of enlightenment. So the temptations include distortions towards specific information, towards the aggrandizement of the self, towards the flowering of the organization in some political, social, or fiscal way. In other words, even like the temptation of money. These distortions remove the focus from the one infinite source of love and light, of which we are all messengers, humble and knowing that we ourselves are the tiniest portion of the Creator. So it's again very Lord of the Rings-ish, right? So in Lord of the Rings, Sauron crafted the rings in secret and then offered great power to anybody to wield the rings. The people using their free will decided to wear the rings, and he used higher dimensional principles to create those rings in the first place. And then once people put those rings on, they entered that spectrum with Sauron and were able to be controlled by him. So it's again the same principles that Tolkien was writing. So let's skip ahead a little bit. So talking a little bit about the attacks by fourth density negative entities. The normal gambit of such fourth density attack is the tempting of the entity or group of entities away from total polarization towards service to others and toward the aggrandizement of self or of social organizations with which the self identifies. In the case of this particular group, each was given a full range of temptations to cease being of service to each other and to the one infinite Creator. So this is, I suppose, it's when the Orion group, the reptilians and all of their other species of ETs that were part of this group, were tempting other positive galactic civilizations away from the positive, loving, spiritual path to become more selfish and to go to the path of service to self. At this point, one of the fifth density entities overseeing such detuning processes determined that it would be necessary to terminate the group by what you might call magical means, as you may understand ritual magic. But let me back up, because I read this passage before. I should have read the first part. So each entity declined these temptations and instead continued with no significant deviation from the desire for a purely service to self orientation. The negative entities decided the only way we can now fight them finally is we must do a kind of ritual magic. We must upset the natural order, the laws of the cosmos and the universe to manipulate and attack. Next, so I mean that's a lot to take in right there. So there's a lot more here. To give you an idea how big this is, like look how big this article is. It just keeps going, and this is all about negative entities and their place in the universe. So I'm going to leave this here and ask you guys what you think of this. Now, I'll tell you real quick why it resonates with me is because we know there's negative entities. We know that there's negative higher dimensional entities because technically anyone who dies is a higher dimensional entity. They move into that, what Ra would call the fourth density, but some would actually call even like a lower than the fourth density, like like a smidgen more, maybe even a smidgen more nuts and bolts physical, like 3.5 density. There's different gradients, but these are the astral planes, the afterlife worlds. We know that there's sociopaths on that side. We know that there's narcissists on that side, and we know they seem to get their power from somewhere. Well, according to Ra, they get their power from the same place we get our power from, which is the one infinite creator, from God. But they're generating that power from inside of themselves through their extreme love of self. And that's their path to spiritual enlightenment, but doing it at the expense of everyone and everything around them. And that is evil. That is the nature of what evil is, how it manifests. And this is the battle between good and evil. But evil is always a minority. So I think Ra said that the number of people on the path of service to self, it's something like 5, 6, 7, 8%, which also corresponds to the number of sociopaths, narcissists in the population. I think it's even lower. I think like 1 in 20 people are have true like a narcissistic personality disorder. So maybe there's a correlation there, or maybe like 1 in 15 people are sociopaths, but that synchronizes to what Ra is talking about, that there is this minority, it seems, in any group of souls that will turn inward and kind of turn cancerous and start serving itself as its own path of spiritual enlightenment at the expense around it. Finally, does this mean that it's wrong to love yourself? Well, obviously not. And basically, the whole idea is that to really be in a much higher positive spectrum, you only have to be 51% altruistic. So there's always going to be this strong grounding in yourself. And if you love yourself and love other people, then that seems to be a thing that really pushes you forward. So if you have a strong love for yourself and who you are, and you love everyone else around you, that's like this really balanced position. Even if that love of yourself means that you have to an extent, serve yourself. So I don't hear about Ra saying that you need to be 100% service to others. I don't think that's even, something that anyone would be able to do in any kind of egoic level of individual existence. Really, you love yourself, you love other people too, to a little bit higher, slightly higher level than, you're focused on yourself, but still love yourself too. And then you enter a joyous vibration of, going to heavenly worlds, and there's, incredible happiness and prosperity and joy. Or the path of darkness, which it will send you into realms of selfishness where everyone is at each other's throats and everybody is trying to backstab one another so that they can individually get ahead. People only work with each other based upon the alignments the alliances that will individually serve each person. And you see this repeated in many fiction works. I think most like Hollywood films, the evil empires and things like that, you see this concept, being carried out because we naturally are intuitive about how this works. And so we already know all these things, like this stuff is already almost like self-evident, but it's the way it works laid out by the law of one. If you like this video, you can get involved at the Facebook group Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. You can grab books like Understanding Life After Death, The Afterlife, and Beyond over at afterlifetopics.com, or book a coaching session with me so we can talk in depth about propositions about what happens when you cross over, how to achieve better out-of-body experiences, better astral travel experiences. You can email me at the email address on the bottom left side of the screen. Thanks for watching this long video and a lot of crazy stuff to digest. The fact this material is so in-depth and interesting makes me, pause and think that there's something going on here or not. But that's why I do take it seriously, because it's interesting stuff and could put pieces together, missing pieces in the big picture of things.